from Amity Business School, along with Professor Manoj Joshi, shall present a case themed upon internationalization of family business, a case of DK exports. Here are the case facts. It was in 1976 that DK Dice and Tools was begun by Krishna Verma. Krishna Verma had been an engineer. It was difficult for him to start with a business then, just because 1976 was a period of national emergency. Most of the capital that he drew was from his family, and that is where the caricature of the entire business structure started, from being a family business itself. It was a big step in the year 2003 when Krishna Verma converted this entire business into DK Exports in the name of merchant exporting. Basically, when his son also joined in the year 2006, which later became a partnership firm between Krishna Verma and Kunal Verma. DK Exports was formed as a partnership firm later. It started exporting various kind of ferrous and non-ferrous casting ferrous and non-ferrous, complete hydraulic cylinder, etc. Sudesh Verma was Krishna Verma's wife. Priyanka Verma is Kunal Verma's wife. It was later Sudesh Verma and Priyanka Verma had started out of their exuberance, the articulate exuberance, that they had begun with Embellished India, which was another firm. They were not siphoning out any funds from DK Exports, but there was only a support which came from the firm, basic firm. Later, the locally existing market had been Lucknow, whereas internationally it had been UK and Belgium. They had been exporting auto components, etc. to these destinations, but the firm was into a search for newer destinations itself. The internationalization was a major concern, but then major product was taken over with the Chinese company as a competitor, the international competitor. These are the other case facts related with the case. The analysis and interpretation involves family business issues, the professionalization and internal leadership, communication, HR and administrative issues, supply chain, etc. Now, the purpose behind, first of all, shift to the decision focus of the case. The decision focus has been professionalization, internationalization, and spin-off, if at all the firm could spin off. The teaching objective of the case were to understand how the enterprise was seeded, to understand the importance and essence of entrepreneurial innovation, to understand and appreciate the lead characters of an entrepreneur, then the importance of preserving of tacit knowledge, imperative for the firm's existence, the importance of business model for small family business firms, risk, barriers, uncertainties and challenges associated with creation of a small family business firm. The teaching objectives later were also converted into the keywords which we've taken as professionalization, internationalization, competition strategy, and also the family business. The data or information had been collected through the primary sources itself. It was to Professor Joshi that the case had arrived for clinical consultancy, and he had conducted a series of personal interviews with Priyanka Verma, with Kunal Verma, Krishna Verma, and Sudesh Verma. This was actually at the inception of the case that Krishna Verma was there. Krishna Verma was still alive. It was later that he died during the year 2007, after Kunal Verma had joined in the year 2006. Thereupon, the case has been structured, and the case has been structured based upon certain concerns which enabled us or which proximated us to write the case. These concerns were first the sad demise of the father, who took away all the tacit knowledge, the workers' expectations which were increased during the day, poor internal communication, need for dynamic capabilities, need for diversification, need for collaboration, need for resolution of issues, need for effective training which was needed to be imparted, need for professionalization which was the ultimate concern, need for development via collusions, competitiveness, and finally the search for newer destinations. There were certain clinical, in the process of clinical consultancy, there were many questions which were answered by us, Professor and myself both, which I shall cater to later. But then, in accordance with the research which had been conducted in this area previously itself, we consulted almost 50 to 60 research journals and research papers in order to have drafted this teaching note, which is right here in my hands. The authors who were consulted were like Tees for dynamic capability, Gartner for venture creation, Joshi himself for innovation, Brockhaus for risk propensity of the entrepreneur, and Malcolm Jensen, etc. There were as much as 30 different authors who have been consulted while preparation of this entire case. Now, not really emphasizing upon, maybe the content. If you can actually look at the content, read them over, so that I can easily skip over the kind of consultancies which will be granted, firstly the kind of questions which were proposed to us by the protagonist, who was Kunal Verma. Kunal Verma was wanting to professionalize. He comes from a background, and that background is an engineering into US and an MBA from the Sloan School of Management. Now, with this kind of a focus, he was not really, maybe he was not actually in tandem with the psyche or the mentality which a small family business is run into India. He did not agree that the firm would run based upon customs and precedents. What he wanted was there should be codified sets and standards, the way we professionalize the firm, the way professionalization is required. He intended to continue with the same business, but then has certain difficulties with the kind of business that he was put into, just because being into Lucknow and being a very small firm who was mainly focusing upon the kind of exports that they made was really difficult for Kunal to handle. Kunal had come from a well-versed set code and professional standard. He had imbibed those professional standards by being into US, while working along or while seeing along all those cultures that he had come from. It was not really sealing well with the kind of environment which was, or the ambience for business performance into India. Later on, the kind of questions which were asked by Kunal were like, maybe how to analyze the structure of the firm, how to have imbibed the taste and knowledge from his father, who had left for his heavenly abode, how to create exports, how to diversify, how to customize the kind of products that he was selling, how to explore newer markets, how to sustain two crises, mainly the European currency crisis, which had actually crumbled the business overall. Now, these were many questions which were part of clinical psychology cases. I'll show you the other slides here, which relate to professionalization and internal leadership, with the board structure particularly, which he wanted to be participatory. Then he needed he even wanted a formal structure of the organization. The transition towards leadership, the kind of leadership that he wanted for himself. Then professionalization, which made a dilute the exercise of leadership, the kind of conventional leadership position that father and son duo had been put into. Later on, there were internal issues relating to communications, HR and administration as well. Departmentalization was unclear and sporadic, the way he found it. Later on, the supply chain was also found to be kind of unnecessary because of overproduction, because of unnecessary transportation, inventory and worker motion. Typical knowledge which was kind of wastage for all. The conceptual learning that we took from that we basically take from the case are seeding of an enterprise, importance of entrepreneurial innovation, appreciate the lead character of the entrepreneur, firm's existence, etc. These are all given over here. Now, why I say this is collectivism and individualism is the kind of environment or the kind of ambience within which father had been operating was too collectivist. We still live into a collective society. Indians have culturally operate people, maybe the level of modernity, but then there are class differences, there are geographical differences, there are certain spatial requirements which are still present into our minds, there are psychological differences which prevent us from exploring other markets, from getting into something which is a newer thing. Father, who had worked for almost 30 years into the same firm, did not want to diversify, did not want merchant exporting to be at such a ebb that he could have brought in a brand out of it, he could have created a brand out of it. He wanted to function as a back office, as a firm which had been created or which had been concerned with the backward linkage of the process rather than the forward linkages, rather than emanating or providing any forward linkages. Son was, it was very difficult for son to assuage. It was very difficult for the son to assuage father in order to have gathered all the information which was actually required for professionalization and internationalization. And it was important for the son to have told the father that, such a thing was important. By the time father leaves for his heavenly abode, father expires, and it is son who is left with almost nothing of the part of basic knowledge. Now son is into a perplex, into a complete dilemma, how to run the business. If he at all wants to professionalize, the kind of employees that he's been looking after, that those who have been working into the firm would not go with him. In case he intends to internationalize, he doesn't have the required resources. spin off, he cannot, just because this business has been continuing for 32 years, and the kind of capital which had been invested was kind of huge, and the son did not have any other alternative available with himself. Now, as a part of the clinical consultancy process, there were questions like, for example, Howard, the son, particularly Kunal, wanted to enhance the structure of the firm. Being an engineer, he would expand the operational base of the firm, and that operational base would emphasize upon the quality aspect more than the quantity aspect. Networking with friends who were from Europe while into his class of MBA in the US was something which was done in order that he could have secured business, which was mainly through the entrepot trade, which is carried out through Belgium into other nations of Europe, like Europe, like Greece, Spain, etc. There were machine shops and fabrication shops which were created in order to enhance the quality standards. Then there were professionalization issues which were also present. He had even a concern relating to the distribution of the processes, relocating and reintegration of the processes. Then he was also apprehensive of the kind of dynamic capability that he needed to cultivate in order to have overcome certain situations which were relating to asset location. Asset location required cost-benefit analysis as well as the location-centric analysis. There were common codes of communication which had to be set up. Internal coordination had to be set up. Then into the fast-changing environment, what was required was co-specialization and asset orchestration, which refers to search for a newer managerial position. Besides these, there were questions which had been asked based upon the scope of operations more than the scale of operations. There were questions which were inquired based upon the hierarchical divide between the knowledge authorities in the profession and differential citizenry. There were questions based upon the grievance redressal procedure